So here we have with us today Paul, who's the founder of Tantraya retreat here in Sacred Valley in Pisac, Peru. Great to have you, Paul.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this particular center he's founded is it combines Eastern practices with these ancient shaman practices. So tell us, how did you kind of start your journey, Paul, and how did it lead you here?
Okay, actually I was kind of having lots of weird experiences and strange phenomenon as a kid, and I was pretty much obsessed by the world of magic, the world of ghosts and spirits and monsters and UFOs and anything kind of strange that I could get my hands on. I fell in love with pretty much immediately, and devoted my basically entire attention to. Really all through my early years, all through my teenage years, I was studying whatever I could get my hands on in terms of sort of magical practices and meditation practices, and trying to open portals to other dimensions in my bedroom at age of 13, and these
Astral
kinds
projection.
of things. As everything, astral projection, lucid dreaming, teleportation, levitation, telekinesis, clairvoyance, everything I was kind of experimenting with.
Straight in there.
Yeah, really from day one. It's my earliest memories of all of that kind of stuff happening, and my main focus being of that. And then as I got older, of course, I began to get a little bit more serious about my practice. I'd read about these sort of other experiences that people were having, and I wanted to experience these exotic states for myself. And so I began to, do sort of more inclusive practices and a little bit more in-depth kind of work. I came to psychedelics in the sort of early 90s. The reason I engaged with that in the first place is because I understood them to be a dangerous path, but a quick path, a short path to the kind of experiences that I was looking for. That was my only reason for kind of doing those things. I really wasn't looking to engage recreationally or anything, and trying to find some kind of meaning in all of that. And then I got into the Taoist stuff for a little bit, the Chinese yogic arts, Tai Chi in particular, Qigong in particular, and then I dropped that away, and I actually began to get a hell of a lot more into the yogic tradition of India. I stayed with the yogic tradition for about 10, 11 years. I was practicing maybe 8 to 10 hours of yoga practice every day.
Which
asana.
particular tradition?
I was doing kind of a lot of asana. I was doing around kind of 4 hours or so of asana, and I would kind of vary it somewhat. Sometimes I'd been doing some sort of Ashtanga stuff, sometimes I'd be doing Iyengar stuff. But I was always looking for something kind of a little bit deeper with it, and I was doing a lot of meditation with it, and a lot of pranayama and those sort of subsidiary kind of practices, as it were.
Yeah.
Or actually not subsidiary, that's sort of what it wants to move towards. But I still wasn't really kind of having the kind of things that I wanted out of it. So I returned to the Qigong and the Taoist practices because I just found them personally to be a little bit more practical, a little bit more effective for myself and for my own.
In terms of the practical world and
to a certain degree, but certainly at that time I was still looking for some kind of exotic experience, some kind of, radical shift in consciousness or something of this nature. I was involved in various other schools, in various other traditions as I was training these things. And I always had a bit of a bias against the shamanic stuff, generally against shamanism, finding, obviously the Eastern traditions generally have a bit of a bias towards them themselves. They don't really engage them, or at least they haven't done at any time in the modern era. Generally speaking, they've turned their back on that. So I also had a kind of a bias against it. But I somehow, very early, this idea of that I needed and wanted to do this ayahuasca medicine was sort of implanted in me like a seed. And I actually wrote my first dissertation back in my first university degree about ayahuasca, about its relationship with language, its relationship with consciousness, how language structured consciousness, how consciousness was structured by language, etc. Things like this, magical languages, how language can open up reality in particular ways. And of course, through my research of that, I came across the ayahuasca, became very fascinated by it. But it wasn't until around 10 years later that I actually found someone who could provide the medicine for me. And that became he became my teacher for quite a number of years after that. Peter Aziz of England, a very, very, very powerful shaman, ayahuasquero. And he, I became very fascinated by the world of shamanism as a result of that experience, and then began to go around the world exploring all of those traditions. I'd already been involved in Sufism, as I'd already been involved in the tantric practices, I'd already been involved in yoga, in meditative sort of practices, in the Taoist arts. And then I began to explore shamanism, and I went and got initiated into the Mongolian Buryat tradition, very traditional kind of Siberian shamanic technology.
That's essentially the origin of shamanism.
Well, the word shaman obviously comes from the Saman. It comes from the word Saman, which is a sort of a lap word.
Okay.
So it's a kind of generic term that's obviously become applied to a very large field, which not always obvious what the relationships in that field are to each other. You know, the African shamanism against the Mongolian shamanism, but actually shamanism was there at the origin of all traditions across the whole planet. So I wouldn't give more credence to the Siberian tradition than any other form of shamanism necessarily. I think it was a Neanderthal practice that was kind of pretty generic. It was pretty much
across
everywhere.
All cultures.
Yeah, and had different flavours or tastes in different places.
Yeah.
But, you know, the essential core shamanic ideals of needing trance or altered states of consciousness, needing some kind of healing modality, needing the engagement with spirits and the world of the spirits, you know, all of these factors need to be there. And then the rest of it can be a kind of a smorgasbord of whatever they kind of feel like, as it were. Many different ways to enter into trance, many different ways to heal, many different pantheons and range of spirits. So, and then I went to Nepal. I got initiated in Nepalese Jankari shamanism, Bon Jankari shamanism, Daga priest shamanism. I went to Haiti, got initiated into the Voodoo cult of Haiti, and all the time still drinking a lot of medicine, drinking a lot of ayahuasca, still doing a lot of my other practices, things like this.
Did you find that all of these cultures use some sort of entheogenic substance, like ayahuasca, or something similar to ayahuasca?
Not now necessarily, no. I mean, I think that in the past, certainly we can trace the origin of all religion and you know, arising out of shamanic use of entheogenic plants. I think that's pretty obvious now. I think we've got a lot of evidence for that. But nowadays, no. I mean, I think the influence of sort of right-hand mainstream exoteric religion has kind of taken the fore in nearly every place. Mongolia, interestingly enough, is the only country in the world that actually has shamanism as its country's religion.
Oh, really? Okay, right.
And you can certainly find a lot of shamans in a lot of other places around the world, but you know, they've often also been tainted or corrupted by the influence of Catholicism, by the influence of other cultures also. I mean, you know, this idea of a kind of a pure shamanism, it exists, but it's not that easy to find. It's always influenced by the culture and by society and by, you know, cultural norms in some way or another. But there is certainly evidence of an entheogenic root to nearly all of the major religions, I would say, certainly. But also in this time, I also became an acupuncturist. I qualified as an acupuncturist. I got myself a master's degree in the study of mysticism and religious experience to give me a kind of an academic background to the things that I was internalising, that I was studying. And, you know, I had this kind of like broad field of experience to work with after a while.
That's fascinating, yeah. You've got so many different and varied experiences across the world, and so I can only imagine how all of those different influences then feed into the design of your things that you then share with other people.
I became kind of very interested in this idea of practices or technologies that could, you know, work very quickly and work very efficiently.
Yeah.
I was really looking for things that could really give a quick boost to the system and create lasting, permanent change in people. So I sort of was picking and choosing, the practices that I personally found extremely efficient,
Right.
and that when I taught them, people had very good experiences with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I, over the years, really kind of like just pared it down to a very, very kind of quite a strong structure
Mm-hmm.
of practice that could support awakening.
Right.
Yeah. And I've been tending to focus in recent years on, well, what we're trying to do here at Tantraya really is bring together the shamanic technologies and understandings and
Yeah.
science with the Eastern meditative traditions, because that gives the shamanic traditions an orientation, a direction.
Right.
Shamanism doesn't really have that idea of a final goal or a direction of spiritual attainment or growth.
In the way that Eastern traditions are
Yeah.
kind of focused on
Yeah,
self-realization.
very
and
much so,
enlightenment.
exactly. Shamanism has never had this. Shamanism has really always been about healing, about
Healing.
engaging with the spirits,
Yeah.
and for sure you become spiritualized through that engagement.
Yeah.
And of course you come into wholeness through the healing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't their point or their purpose or their focus. So you can kind of play around in the field of shamanic experience without really getting anywhere.
Right.
Just more experience. So I thought, well, with the meditative traditions, the Eastern traditions, gives the direction and the intention and the purpose to the shamanic technology.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to bring in the Western science as well. Because we in my view, I don't feel that we can and should neglect the rational, logical, inquiry mind. It's
The
a very
analytical component.
it's very useful. We need it, especially when we enter into these very peculiar states and conditions of consciousness. Then it becomes kind of essential. As we kind of flounder in that space, we become very naive. Yeah, of course, confusion, delusion, illusion, all of these things extremely impossible without a clear model of how to work,
Right.
without a clear guide of the direction and the
Structure
path.
around it.
Yeah, it's vital. And to be able to kind of look inside the brain and see what's going on as we explore these states, then we can recall some very valuable information in this way.
That's one of the things that I felt recently working with ayahuasca. It was, while I was in that state, I was like, how on earth do I bring this back down,
Yeah.
And I guess,
Yeah.
and at that point, I was like, well, people, anyone working with entheogens, we kind of need tools that will help us to then, as you say, ground the consciousness in this reality, and not get lost and keep having a series of experiences which we can't really make sense of.
Yeah, precisely. No, well, I've personally adapted or created or developed a system that enables us to be able to potentialize the states that are available to us under the influence of the entheogens, particularly ayahuasca in my own work.
Right.
Now, what do I mean by that? The energy of the medicines have to be moving through the system according to some kind of anatomy. Now, obviously, they're moving through the system in terms of the physical anatomy, getting into the brain and the bloodstream.
So, in essence, it's the kundalini which is being stimulated.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that ayahuasca is kundalini medicine. And we can think about that in another way as being really just kind of pure energy.
Right.
That there is an energy inside of us that is animating us, that is making us alive, that is Shakti, power, energy, like this. So, ayahuasca kind of provides a very big boost to the prana, to the chi of the system. 20 years worth of pranayama in a single evening. And this
relate to that.
awakens Kundalini. Kundalini wakes up, and as the energy moves through the subtle anatomy, you enter into, different states and conditions of consciousness.
Right.
Now, what happens, of course, is when the medicine wears off, when we've fully metabolized it, is the condition of consciousness that was engendered by the advancement of the energy dissipates. State of consciousness basically comes back to ground zero. not necessarily ground zero, maybe a little bit above ground zero, and not to say that you haven't gained the healing, and not to say that you don't feel good because of the serotonin boosts and the endorphins and things. Of course, you feel great, but the ability to hold those very kind of expanded states of consciousness is not available to most people.
Right.
You might recall it in a dream, you might have subtle sensations of it now and again, but kind of to make it available as a condition of consciousness is not there.
And I think this is one of the main concerns that a lot of people seem to have, is that they'll ask, because I kind of promote in a way use of psychedelics and entheogens for self-exploration healing, and people tend to ask as to like why do you need external substances when you can go through all these paths, and what kind of benefit does it bring you? And I guess does it really can it give you really enlightenment, and so because people sometimes they have this thinking that it's like maybe it's like a temporary experience which then doesn't actually translate into. And so, I mean, I would disagree with that, because I personally have experienced a lot of personal growth and healing through entheogenic medicines. But I think what you're saying is really important, because it's kind of showing us how we can actually catalyze our growth by using entheogens in this way, in the way that.
We need a kind of a sustaining model that can hold that. So we work in my school with the sort of subtle anatomy model taken from the yogic tantric tradition and taken from the Taoist model, Qigong model, which has very effectively mapped the inner body, has mapped the energy body. Now,
which is real, of course. So, for example, you've got different points on your hands and feet, and lots of doctors they practice this as well.
Of course, I mean it's been in use for kind of like 5,000 years or so in China. I don't think they would have wasted their time with it if it wasn't effective.
Yeah, so, for sure.
And they've mapped it very effectively. They know what every point on the body does.
Yeah.
And the truth is that subtle states of consciousness have to be engendered by subtle anatomy. Now, if the subtle anatomy isn't prepared, if it isn't sort of empowered to hold that level of energy, then when the medicine wears off, of course, the energy wears off. But if you build the energy body,
you can hold it.
You can hold it. You can sustain it. You can turn these states of consciousness into stages of consciousness, permanent conditions of consciousness, and each time you can begin to step up in this way, moving higher and higher and higher.
In the awareness,
in awareness, in consciousness, until the realization that you are consciousness, that consciousness is all there is, that it pervades all things, that's you. Yes.
In your daily life, like in.
And in in the systems that I work with, in a very grounded and embodied way, not in a very
like flying around.
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid it's a problem within spiritual communities generally.
Yeah.
It's not that difficult to open the higher centers. Sitting meditation, generally speaking, tends to push the energy upwards. So people tend to open the third eye pretty easily, open the crown center pretty easily.
Yeah.
But because the lower centers aren't open, they can't actually hold it. They can't pull it down and be grounded, sensible human beings. We need to pull these things through for active use. Well, and for the actual transformation of our friends, our communities, our societies. We can't do that if we're tripping on the light.
Yeah, for sure.
Bring it down. So.
Yeah. And so, do you think this is kind of is this one of the reasons why people tend to have sometimes, like even with Kundalini yoga, with really powerful medicines, is they'll have these like really mind-blowing experiences, and then somehow it kind of damages them in a way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's like trying to put kind of like 1,000 volts through wiring that's only set up for 5.
Right.
You're talking about, an actual physical energy, at least on one level, and you're also talking about actual kind of energy channels on another level.
Right.
If the channels aren't prepared and you start pumping through loads of energy through the channel, you burn it out. You know, the chakras are like the fuse boxes, the nadis, the meridians are like the wiring of the system, and the kundalini is like the electricity supply. If you switch on the electricity and the wiring is faulty, of course you're going to get a kind of a burnout somewhere. It's going to cause a problem. Likewise, if the fuse boxes aren't kind of, you know, working the way they are, an even bigger kind of explosion of some kind or another, you know, major problem. So, of course, kundalini syndrome and chi syndrome and chi sickness, all of these things, they're possible. And medicines, if, you know, unregulated and, you know, not held correctly, of course, yes, you can have these awakenings, and yes, it can cause you more problems than if you hadn't drunk the medicine in the first place.
I see.
Yeah.
And so, do you think that it's actually better for people to have some certain years or even months, maybe, of some spiritual practice preparation before drinking, or while you're
well,
drinking?
I mean, we, you know, the way we we don't expect that to be the case when people come on retreat with us, but for sure, the moment they get here, we're you know, giving them practices to do so that we can get them at least mildly ready.
Yeah.
But yes, of course, preparing the system for these very powerful experiences, of course, is a sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, it was always a case of you needed to prepare the system. You know, hatha yoga, now what we take to be hatha yoga in the asana system, you know, the physical postures, that was only a preparation. That was a preparation for the pranayama, you know, the energy work. And the energy work was only a preparation for the deeper stages of meditation.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
The stages.
Yes, it's wonderful really that we have that model to be able to work with and to utilise. You know, in the sort of ayahuasca tradition, sort of generally, you know, they've got their own kind of way of working, and they don't have that model. They don't talk about the sort of the energy body in the same way, you know, with nadis and points and, you know, sort of chakra points and dantians and things like this. So now that we can kind of combine that model, and you know, we never really take these models too seriously. We're not sort of talking about these as objective levels of reality. Because in my sort of understanding and experience, there is no objective level of reality. Everything we experience is subjective, and you know, so we don't take it too seriously, but we can utilise it as a means to be able to ground the energies of higher states of consciousness into our daily lives, into our physical bodies, and into our practical experience.
I think that's really important, because so many people are kind of now becoming aware of ayahuasca and so many different types of medicines, and so for a lot of people that can result in confusion or even having like a negative experience, would you say, if they're not prepared?
Yeah, I think it's you know, we're entering into a very new, strange, unknown and very powerful field of information, awareness, entities, energies. It's a sort of, you know, you're like a baby, you know, entering into a new world. You don't know how to navigate it. You have not been given the tools to do that. You know, your schooling didn't provide that education. And, you know, even as a shaman, you know, you still need to have certain levels of training given to you. You still need to practice. You still need to do things. It still isn't just a given. So the idea that some internet kid in the bedroom can just brew up and drink and, you know, at least get the full benefit of the medicine, it is a joke. You know, these traditions have been around for a very, very long time for very, very good reason. And to just simply disregard them is a grave error in my view.
Right. And so a lot of people these days, it's much more accessible for a lot of people to smoke DMT or changa rather than kind of like traveling and going to retreat. What would you say are the kind of main differences? Because the active compound is the same, but the experiences are quite different.
They are. Again, I think that it's important to see that actually we've gone down a very particular path of inquiry in the Western analysis of ayahuasca, which is to mainly concentrate on the DMT component of the medicine. You know, Rick Strassman sort of opened up that field of research, and you know, we got very interested in it as a kind of a culture. Really, it's fascinating. You know, Terence McKenna's ideas of interior aliens and self-dribbling basketballs and things. I mean, you can't deny it's pretty interesting. But definitely from a shamanic perspective, the main healer, the most powerful spirit in the medicine is not in the leaf. It's not in the chacruna or the chaliponga or the other DMT containing plants. The power of the medicine is in the ayahuasca vine,
Right.
The spirit of the anaconda, the spirit of the serpent.
Yeah.
It's not the DMT. So this kind of whole focus where the vine is only there to activate the DMT. My teacher used to give medicine to people with no DMT component whatsoever, as it was illegal to travel with. He just used to use the vine, and people would still have full-on visions, full-on ayahuasca experiences, snakes, serpents, the whole game.
Yeah.
So the DMT isn't considered to be that vital. It's interesting. There's no doubt it's worthy of more study.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to when we begin to research Harma and Harmony a little bit more. That certainly seems to be the neurogenetic and epigenetic, neurogenetic quality of the medicine, creating new neurology, new
Amazing.
neurons, new pathways in the brain, repairing the brain, opening up hidden portions of the brain. It gets very, very interesting, from that perspective. So Harma and Harmaline is going to get quite big, I think. And microdosing Harmaline, using it as a meditation tool, using it as a lucid dreaming medicine, using it as a muscle relaxant, it's very effective. Of course, it's still a monoamine oxidase inhibitor.
Right.
So if you are going to use it, you still need to be careful about at least your pharmaceutical intake.
Right.
Your plant-based, food-based intake, not so much, not so important, but pharmacologically, certainly.
And so what would you say is the kind of then role of the shaman? Because we're seeing that a lot of people are doing a lot of things by themselves, as you say, ordering things off the internet. Whereas in these cultures, it was kind of more of a ceremonial type of setup.
Yeah, again, for very good reason. The shaman is there for a variety of reasons. The shaman is there to protect the space. When we do entheogenic medicines, when we do psychedelics, the aura, the energy body opens, becomes kind of translucent, and you're also kind of glowing very brightly on the astral plane. You're lit up like a firework, so things are attracted to you. And if you're permeable, things can get in. They can get stuck. Energy systems can get disrupted. So the shaman's there to protect the space. The shaman is there to pull out the energies that are brought to the surface by the medicine.
Yeah.
Again, it was a symbiotic relationship. The medicine was only designed to stir the energies up and bring them up. The shaman was there to take them off after. So medicine, and then the shaman is there to then bring in the beneficent energies of blessing, the healing, the abundance, to patch everything up.
Put your energy back together.
To put you together again, to patch up your energy body, to recall your higher self if it's moved away, which it can do, and to, just repair. So without all of that, you're kind of very vulnerable. You're as I said before, a babe in a new world, and you don't have the protection. You don't know what you're doing yourself. And these systems have been in place for good reason, because it can get a bit sticky out there.
So how do we, as kind of explorers of consciousness, of the universe, how do we protect our own energy, even when working with slightly less powerful substances like LSD, for example?
Oh, well, I don't think we should underestimate that chemical.
No,
personally,
sure.
no, I wouldn't have used that as an example. I think LSD, of course, can be supremely powerful.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And really, of course, LSD doesn't have any kind of history of use beyond the Kaikyon in sort of the Eleusinian mysteries with the ergot-infested rye. We haven't really engaged with it. A bit of morning glory, actually, in some of the Mayan and Aztec and Toltec cultures. But not so much. But of course, being synthesized in the lab, we don't really have a ceremonial structure for that, and
it's kind of easy to take yourself.
That can be a little bit, it can create some problems in the neuronal firing of the brain, and you can have some long-term problems as a result of kind of blowing holes in your energy body and things through that. So I would never actually really recommend that people do generally entheogens or psychedelic medicines on their own generally, if I'm being completely honest. I think it needs to, at very least, to always be done in a ceremonial manner, always being done in a very respectful manner, and then learning some very basic self-cleansing techniques, even something as simple as smudge massaging or
Palo
you know,
Santo.
Palo Santo, salt baths, you know, utilising some sort of fairly basic technologies like this.
Breathing.
Yeah, you know, obviously it depends on the kind of the substances and things that we're utilising will depend on how much, you know, protection and things of that nature we're going to need.
Yeah.
But we need to get very mature with our use of these things because they are obviously very powerful and they can be very beneficial, but they can also be quite difficult for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. I think this should be enough for the YouTube. And then if you just briefly want to just give a rundown on how everything works here, like how does the retreat work, like.
Okay. Well, we hold a retreat here once a month, and we're working with Ayahuasca medicina 3 times during the course of 7 days, and then we're doing lots of qigong practice, lots of energy practice, lots of deep meditation practices. We're including puja, working with different deities, different gods, different goddesses who have been traditionally associated with liberation, with enlightenment.
Yeah.
And we're bringing all this together in a kind of an 8-day package. And in the meantime, we're running qigong classes, tai chi classes, we're doing acupuncture and healing arts, massage, yoga, meditation, and we're looking to build consciousness research centre here with flotation tanks.
In Pisa?
Here. Here at Tantraya, hopefully. Flotation tanks, deep brain imaging software.
Amazing.
Drinking medicine in the tank, being able to read these.
Some high level stuff.
This is what we're working towards. Trying to, again, bring it all together. The science, the shamanism, the meditation. Really trying to evolve our species, work out how we can transform.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. So insightful to talk to you, and I think they're going to be having a lot more interviews and a lot more cool things coming up. And we are located here in Pisac in the Sacred Valley. So check the links below. Make sure you hit subscribe, like the video, and see you next time.
Thank you.